Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. Today's guest is an award-winning narrator from Utah. She's goes by the name of Nancy Peterson. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thanks, Christian. I am happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. I am a voice actor and an actor, so there's a bit of crossover here. I'm very intrigued to pick your brains
Well,
about this.
I am happy to answer any questions you have for me.
Brilliant. I can't wait. I can't wait. Let's just start at the beginning. I like to sort of start there. Talk us
Sure.
through your personal journey of becoming a narrator and how this came to be.
Well, which version do you want, the short or the long? Because there's there's a long version, which kind of well, I'll give you the long version because you can edit it, right?
It'll work. It'll work for a podcast.
Okay.
I like to go long.
Okay. So, I was about 3 years old when my father sustained an injury to his eyes. And as a result, at the time, the surgery they did was very different. He had to remain in bed with sandbags next to his head for 3 months. And this happened twice. So, when we couldn't disturb him, we couldn't bother him. He had to just stay as perfectly still as he possibly could. So as a result, then the local society for the blind, I believe it was called at the time, I don't know what it's called now, would send him materials. A lot of them, they were about this big and they were square and they were like records, but they were floppy, just a little piece of plastic you would put on your record player. You could listen to Time Magazine or Reader's Digest or periodicals or novels. So I would sneak in very carefully and listen with my dad. And of course, I wanted to be very gentle, but I think that's really where I would just sit quietly, listen. It was very comforting. And this, I just felt like it was a very very comfortable place for me to be. And then fast forward a couple of years, and a lot of the things I would listen to on record, and growing up, cassette, audio was a great format for me for learning, for comprehension, and I just really enjoyed it. So, being someone who has been performing since, I was 10 or so years old in various capacities, transitioning to audiobooks was something that I'd just been curious about, honestly. And then in 2013, I just basically Googled it and found there was really nothing there except for one little remote site called acx.com. And that, you probably have heard of that by now. I think it was 2 years old. It had started in 2011. And so it wasn't widely known, but it was, for me, I don't see how otherwise I could have gotten into audiobooks because, yes, I am in Utah. Most of the audiobook people at the time were wherever the publishers were, which was Michigan, Oregon, the East or West Coast. So, and I think one in Ohio maybe. But, it was interesting because for me, it was a way to break into the industry. And so I'm grateful for it. ACX kind of gets a bad rap sometimes because the quality control is not as good as it should be. But for me, I'm grateful for it. So there you go.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay.
While you mentioned that as well, to be honest, I can't think of any like immediate competitors to ACX. Like it seems that ACX is like the kind of the standard, but because
There's a
there's not.
reason. There's
Okay,
a reason for that. ACX is actually the same company as Audible. It's also the
um,
same company as Amazon. They're all basically the same company. So you hear more about ACX because, well, they kind of pioneered it to begin with. I think there have been others, but if you think about it, Audible it's in their best interest to get content. That's really what they want to do. So this works for them because it just creates content for Audible and Amazon.
that makes sense because it's like homegrown, so they don't have to pay as much. Well, they don't have to pay anything to generate that content. They can just get that content as opposed to say purchasing it off whoever. Like for instance, I imagine if they do like let's say a Harry Potter novel, you have to pay rights for that to use that to the likenesses, everything like that. Must be
Yeah.
So
Well, an
crossover there.
Audible, it's I don't know the proper term to call it. It's like a distribution platform, but it's also an aggregator. But they have a studio, Audible Studios, which is a like their production arm of Audible. Um, but yeah, they what they have provided mostly is a platform for for people, for publishers, and probably honestly, publishers have they don't go through ACX. That's more for independent authors, people who don't have, a publisher because they have their own agreements with Audible. But I think they just saw it as an opportunity when the explosion of indie authors was just happening. They're like, well, these could be in audio format. People ask for it. And probably you already know this, but the audio industry every year has had double digit growth. It's amazing. If you go to Publishers Weekly, they always do kind of a year in review of audiobooks and the growth of audiobooks. It continues to grow. And that's not the case with every format. Like ebooks are down, I think. Print books, I'm not sure about print, but audiobooks just, you know, people want audio. So,
Yeah, it's an interesting time because I think one thing you could certainly say is that like rereading as a format, just in general, as a format, like every day we're reading all the time, be it with like our phones, books, whatever else. So you're never not reading. But then, of course, now we live in an age where there are options, ways to help people, say with dyslexia and such, and so I think like audiobooks are a nice way to kind of get around that as well. Like if you really, really are suffering with dyslexia and it's something that it's just too difficult to consistently read, then you've got that option. Plus, I don't know, like I feel like with audiobooks, it kind of brings it more to life. Like, of course, you've got film and stuff, but you can still kind of use your imagination, but then little bits of it are filled in for you as well. So it's kind of like I don't know. The best example I can think of is there's this 1980s version of Lord of the Rings. I think it was produced by the BBC, and to me, it's like it's different. It's very different to the films, but it's got like a certain charm about it that I can't really explain. But these actors like really, really went out of their way to like make it an experience, and you can tell like it's
yeah.
very, they probably didn't have a very big budget at the time. And I don't know, like I really implore anyone who's listening to the show, go out of your way to check it out because it still holds up and it's a good example of like when you really go for it with an audiobook, that's what it can be.
Yeah. Well, and audio is interesting because there's quite a range. Sounds to me like what you're describing is like an audio drama or
Yeah,
audio
sorry.
play.
Yeah.
So, which actually is one branch of audiobooks. Then you have others where you have one person doing all of it. But I think it's a different form of audio, but I think each one kind of has its own. If it's a good story and the story is being told well, it's like you're watching a movie. At least it is for me. So like in my case, one that comes to my mind that is similar to that is Murder on the Orient Express. And I had a cassette, and this would have been probably 25 years ago or something like that, but full cast. And I mean, you're seeing more and more multicast. I've been a part of two multicasts in the last month, and that's always really fun. My part of them, obviously is much smaller, but the production value are a lot more fun. The other thing that you'll start to hear, and sometimes in those audio dramas, sorry, I forgot this. In those audio dramas, sometimes they will include sound effects or music. And a good example of that is Serial Box. They do like a full audio production. So that's even, I don't even know if that's still audio drama. Anyway, so you get these various types of audio storytelling. And yeah, I mean, if it's done well, those are amazing to listen to. So I don't do a lot of audio drama. There are some people who that is sort of their thing and they do a lot of it and they have a company, Sound Booth Theater is a company. They do a lot of audio drama and audio, full on audio production with sound effects, etc. So sometimes music is added at the intro and outro, but a lot of the things I do are more just the, reading. But I'm going to tell you a little secret here that I think is fascinating. One of my favorite, pardon me, books series out there is I need a sip of water. Hang on.
Do, 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 do.
Have the water here. Always keep water. Okay. The series is Flavia de Luce. It's set in a little town somewhere in the UK. The main character is an 11-year-old girl, Flavia de Luce. It's read, the audiobooks are read by Jane Entwistle. And I don't know if you've ever heard of any of her work. She's amazing. I listen to those. I'm one of those people that it's like a comfort for me. Like I'll listen to the same thing sometimes over and over,
Mhm.
especially when I'm doing something like, that is, well, I'm doing crafts or knitting or whatever. I like to listen to my favorite audiobooks. Why? I don't know. It's just me. But I would listen to those over and over. And when I started considering, well, I want to look into doing audiobook narration for myself, I started listening differently to those books. And it was fascinating to listen with a different ear because what I realized is Jane Entwistle, I really saw the like a movie in my mind with one person. And I'm like, man, she can do all these different voices. She's amazing. And then as I listened more closely, I realized that it was less about the fact that she didn't sound like a 50-year-old man because she's not, she doesn't really sound like that. She did use pace and tone, but what she did is she created an opportunity for my mind to fill in those blanks seamlessly. So that to me is like a mark of a fabulous storyteller, is someone who allows the listener to create something that's unique. It's uniquely theirs in a way too, because I have pictures in my mind about what they look like and where they live, and that's done with the combination of those words and a really good narrator, a teller of stories can do that for you. So, because, when we try and do the voices, they can either come off as like caricature or they don't sound like a real person. And you're like, they sound fake and they just don't, it doesn't work. It can be jarring even, but just a slight shift in tone, a slight change in pacing or a different physicality will actually, change enough so that the listener will buy it. So yeah, I mean, like, I'm not a 6-year-old kid or a 13-year-old girl or an 80-year-old man, but I hope when someone listens, they can see and hear and really buy the fact that that's really who is talking. And I'm trying not to make them a caricature. They're like a real person. In fact, I'm going to say something that PJ Oakland, a fabulous coach who I just is amazing, he often will say, commit, don't comment. And what he means by that is when you're in these characters, you are committing to the actual, like, how are they feeling? Where are they from? What is their background? Do they have anything that is a weakness? Do they have things they love? Bring all those things into your mind, into the character you're portraying, and don't do a commentary on the person because they do tend to become more of a caricature. So it works better in it will pull your audience in and the listener in if you are invested. You know what I mean? And it's not about putting a character on or doing a voice. It's so much more than doing a voice. I hope I'm explaining this well.
Absolutely. No, it's fascinating. As always, I have a million questions. But
Okay.
I think the most kind of logical question I have right now is what exactly is your preparation process for approaching an audiobook? And like, do you read the whole book beforehand? Do you read sections of it? Do you just focus on the characters to gain an idea of them? Like, what's your process?
Okay. There are many, I mean, you talk to narrators and you'll get different answers from everyone, but I think the common answer would be yes, we do read it ahead of time. How
Wow.
that happens is going to be different, and how we use that is going to be different. Some people, like if they have there's a really tight schedule, they will hire someone to read for them, and then they receive basically a book report with chapter breakdowns, character breakdowns, arcs. They will inform them of any surprises or anything that, you don't like. Halfway through the book, you find out someone's got an accent that they didn't even talk about at all into the first half of the book.
Right.
They will
Yeah.
create for you the lists, the information, so that you go into this knowing what it is that you are reading and the arc of the story as well. And so that's really helpful. I typically will do my own prepping, and I think most of us do. Um, we sometimes have to hire researchers if there are a lot of words that are either foreign or difficult, or scientific. Every sort of industry has its own lingo. So sometimes you have to hire an expert in a certain field to help you with that, especially in nonfiction. Um, for me, a lot of people will go through and they will mark every character on a fiction piece, different colors, and that's helpful for them. Me, it is not. I don't like having a lot of marks on my manuscript. It actually takes me out of the story a little bit. So for me, the only things I will do with the actual manuscript is if there's a word I don't know, it's highlighted. And then I have my list, and I can go to the list of research words that have already been prepared, that either I've prepared or a researcher has prepared. And there are some amazing researchers out there. I had something one time that I was like, I don't even, is it a letter of the alphabet? I couldn't figure out what it was. It didn't look familiar at all. It was a symbol. And come to find out, it was the Greek letter phi. It didn't look like the Greek letter phi to me. I don't know what it was, just this unusual symbol on the page. Well, come to find out, the researcher did her job. She said, that is the symbol phi, and this is what it means. And she, in this context of like a neuroscientific, you know, she was able to find it out. And so I could put it in without it sounding out of place or like I didn't know what I was talking about. And there, I will say, there are times when we as narrators, we're reading words and we really don't have an idea what we're saying. That has happened.
Yeah.
And because the words are completely like it's like a super scientific piece, and it's like I don't even know what I just said. So hopefully, with the right preparation, we can go through and sound like we know what we're saying.
Have you ever had a instance where maybe the dialogue was made up, like a made up language, and you had to kind of give it some conviction, even though it doesn't exist?
That happens a lot in fantasy. I haven't done a lot of fantasy, but yes, and that's kind of fun. And usually the author has something very specific in mind. So I had one author that I worked with. This was a middle grade fantasy that she was very specific about things, how they needed to be said. So she actually sent me a recording of her saying these words and how she wanted them to be said. So that was really fun, because usually in fantasy, you get to make up, accents, or you get to make up characters, and you can go push a little bit farther, and they don't have to be perfect, right? You can just, it's totally your creation, really. But they're fun.
Yeah,
So yeah,
well, that's the main thing, isn't it? As long as it's fun.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
I think the thing that kind of fascinates me the most about what it is that you do is that the amount of time it takes and the preparation and such. Like right there, you telling us about the whole research angle. I never would have known that had I not asked you that. Like I mean, it seems perfectly logical as well. If you're doing this, let's say several times in a month, let's say you've got to read, I don't know, 6 7 books, and you've got to do all this by the end of the month, and they're each like 2 3,000 words or more. No, so way more than that. Like let's say 5,000 pages or something crazy like that.
Mhm.
Like you have to do that. I
Yeah.
mean, you don't have the time to sit and read it. And as great as that would be, it's, I suppose you don't always get that luxury, and then therein lies, how you approach it. I suppose when you were training to do this, like what were the kind of main lessons that you had to learn?
That is a fabulous question, because there really is no like certification out there or any sort of Even so, there's no, well, like, a dentist or a lawyer, you have
Right.
certain tests you have to pass. With this, you really don't, which is great. I mean, a lot of people, this is their second career. Um, However, um, you do have to manage to understand specifications for audio. If you don't have that knowledge, you have to learn it. And there are a lot of ways to learn it. I mean, to start out with, there are people on YouTube who can say, try this course for ACX or whatever. ACX is probably the minimum standard you want to use. But, but there are other tools. For example,
Right.
a tool called Second Opinion, and you can just Google Second Opinion audiobook. And it's developed by Stephen J. Cohen, who's a fabulous narrator, and he's also a producer. It will check your audio for you. But you have to learn what these mean. And if most of us have come from a sort of more of a creative background, we've done some sort of performance typically. So all of this is, again, like learning a foreign language. And that's really important because if you don't meet those specs, you can do a whole book. And if it doesn't meet the specs, you can't use it. So that is probably the first place to go, is what are the specs required to submit to either ACX or another platform. We have Spotify now, which is Findaway Voices, Audiobooks Unleashed. I use Spoken Realms a lot. Stephen Cohen is the owner of that. And so I will do books through them when they're my production, or ACX. So did that even answer the question? I'm thinking now, I just totally yeah. So, and along with that, honestly, anyone could do it. They could attempt it. No one is going to stop
I was
them.
gonna say, I don't think anyone could do it. And
Yes.
that's not to say that I don't believe in people's ability, but I mean, okay, I've
Yeah.
never personally done narration, but I have attempted it just like
Uh-huh.
for fun here and there. And it's so different from voice acting and voiceovers and
Yes.
everything else. Like it's a whole other world. And I just knew in the few times that I just trialed it, I was like, no, this takes this
Yeah.
is like a whole other world. That's why, for instance, whenever I talk about voice acting and voiceovers, I say that it's different from acting, because it is. It's like a whole realm unto itself. And I think audio narration is another avenue that's its own world, because you just can't approach it the same way. And that was for me just trialing it a little bit. I mean, you've been doing it for what, 13 years, over 13 years?
10 now. It was 2013 when
Sorry,
I
10
did my
years.
first book. But yeah, no, what
Madness.
you're saying is spot on. Um, and it isn't for everyone, you know, for many reasons. And it's disappointing because a lot of these get rich quick people will say, look, you can make this much money on ACX. It's like, no, you're crushing people's dreams. Don't even go there. But
Was
yeah,
it's that one time I was looking into this, and I was negotiating with someone to do an audiobook, and they were laying out like what their expectations were. And at the time it clashed with certain things that I was doing. So unfortunately I couldn't do it. But I was looking at like their daily expectation, because I thought it was the sort of thing I could do in increments or something like that. I don't know. And I'm sure you can, but this particular person was asking I do sort of a Monday to Friday type deal, several hours, and I just knew like I couldn't do that. I'd need rests. I like, because I know that from my voice acting and acting work. Like, you need that. You need time away. Gosh, with podcasting, I know that like there's a certain amount I can do before I'm like, okay, I like no more. Like, I think the longest show we ever did was like 3 hours, and that was insane. I don't know how people do shows like that regularly. Like, I tend to average somewhere around an hour and a half, but that's enough for me. Even like to
yeah.
talk for that long is just like, oh, I don't know how you do it.
Well, it is very physical.
Right.
Um, and part of that, For every, I mean, they can even break it down. You can find, studies on this. For every hour with a healthy voice, for every hour of speaking, you should take a 10-minute non-speaking rest.
Mm,
That's just if everything's great. If you start to get a cold or you have problems, it is total vocal rest. The other thing I do is I have a humidifier in my booth that I have my little hygrometer that
interesting.
tells me the humidity in my booth. Um, and that is for vocal health and it also reduces mouth noise, which is a big deal in audiobooks. Like if I've done, a lot of forms of VO over my career, but in audiobooks, you can't go through like you can in a 30-second spot, remove all the breaths, remove all the mouth noise, because it doesn't take that long to do a 30-second spot. When you've got a 13-hour book, the editing and proofing time after the fact, I mean, it is very laborious. And here's the other thing. you know People say audiobooks are like they don't pay well. There is a lot of truth to that, actually, because as far as VO work, audiobook work is probably the least well paying in the bunch. The thing that's nice, though, is it's super consistent. So I pretty much work full time, and you don't always have that opportunity in other forms of voiceover. But yeah, you have to have a very quiet space. That's also, in a 30-second spot, that you're throwing some music and some other things. The space isn't as important. It's important. I'm not saying it's not important, but a well-treated space is one of the very first things you have to have for an audiobook. Because otherwise people can't listen for an extended period of time, you know?
Yeah, I have to come back to that. I can't listen to like a whole sitting of that. I don't know, like that's just me. But I like that coming in and out. Like I remember listening to I think it was The Martian audiobook, and I watched the
Mm-hmm.
film later on, and I have to say, for anyone that hasn't listened to the audiobook, it's miles better than the film. Like it's,
Yeah.
if anything, the film doesn't quite do it justice. It does. It's a good attempt, but the audiobook really kind of gives you an extended kind of impression of what that would feel like and what it would be like and stuff. And I think
There
that's
are
just
two versions of The Martian, by the way. There's
ooh.
the original, which was narrated by R.C. Bray, and I have that one. And then Will Wheaton did the next.
I haven't had
They
that.
bought out the contract, and Will Wheaton bought that out and did the narration. He didn't buy it out. He did the narration. I don't know who bought it. Someone bought it back and redid it. I have the original R.C. Bray, and I think he is fabulous.
I
I
think that's the
haven't
one
heard
I
the Will
listened to.
Wheaton. Oh, he is like a rock star. He is so good. And he's a lot of narrators have very similar beginnings, especially if we've been in it for a long time, because we were the people out there going, we want to get into this. How do we do it? And we're just cold calling, publishers. So,
Oh,
and
interesting.
I think that's maybe how he got it. I shouldn't speak for him.
No, no,
I
no,
don't know.
but it's
Um,
interesting. Like it's a good question because
yeah.
I feel the same about voice acting and voiceovers. Like when people ask me that, like, how did you get into that? To be honest, you just apply for stuff. You just put yourself out there and you hope for the best. And sometimes you get approached by big productions, but it's like you keep doing it, you build up
Mhm.
something, and then eventually you get somewhere else. And it's like I've been pursuing acting since 2019, and I'm only now really starting to get projects, but it's still constantly chasing all the time, chasing, chasing, chasing.
Independent contracting work that is your life.
Yeah.
It's what it is. I don't know if you ever get to a place unless you get a lot of recognition that you're
Mm.
never really having to at least some point hustle. And there is that. But there you hopefully at times too you can coast a little bit. But yeah, we're all independent contractors. So
Yeah. It's fun. I don't know. Like every now and again I'll sit there and I'll be like, this is what I do for a living. This is
yeah,
awesome. But
yeah.
yeah, there is a tremendous amount of hustling. Maybe more so than a standard 9 to 5. But I don't know. It's just it is what it is, isn't it?
It is.
What would you say are the main qualities of a good narrator?
Okay. Well, I think someone who is okay being alone for long periods of time. We're going to just be practical because, as you discovered, it's I spend a lot of time in here
Right.
by myself, self-directing most of the time. Sometimes I have a director that's live with me. Most of the time I don't. And you have to be able, it's very different from just reading a book. So like right now, the book I have right in front of me, a manuscript that has a good portion of French words, a good portion of Vietnamese and African words. This is a nonfiction. And so I'm stopping every paragraph. Even if I've done all my research, I'm stopping, referring back to my notes to make sure I'm saying the words correctly, the ones that I don't know. French, I'm pretty good with French, but Vietnamese, I really don't know at all. And I don't know any of the African dialects, and so I have to keep looking those up. So I'm stopping every 30 seconds to 1 minute, refreshing, making sure I'm saying things correctly. And if I make a mistake, I have to stop and go back. And that's really now industry standard. It hasn't always been like before, especially when people were working in studio, they get the book or the pages in front of them, which is all digital now, but as they would read, if they made a mistake, they would stop, and just make a noise like a clap or a clicker, or if they have an editor, the editor will mark it, and they have to go again, and they have this big long piece, that it's going to have to be edited out. That is not as common anymore as people working out of their home studios. And what publishers are asking of us is basically what's called punch and roll editing or pre-edited audio. So like right now, I'm going through, and if I make a mistake, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to reverse it to where the mistake was, and I'm going to reread it as best I can. I don't catch everything, and they'll send me corrections, and I'm going to have to go through it again. But I'm not sending them one long track of everything. It's a pre-edited track. And like I said, most publishers now, they want that punch and roll. They don't want long form. There are exceptions to that. But most of the time, it's clean punch and roll. So you're sending them a pre-edited product. It doesn't have all the takes in it. You have to have the one take that you decide you want and send it off that way.
When it comes,
okay.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
I think I get off track. So if I'm going off track, you may need to say, wait, let's go back to what the question was.
Oh, I will.
Okay,
No, I mean,
good.
I think for me, I just like to let people talk and listen and learn. That's my my main deal here. And if you get too far off track, I'm like, let's do the back. But yeah, that doesn't really happen generally. Anyway,
okay.
You were talking a lot about editing there. I just wanted to kind of know, like, is the expectation always placed upon narrators to have to do their own editing, or do there exist audio editors specifically for this? Like, do you always have to do your own editing?
No. This is just the preliminary editing.
Okay.
It's really not considered editing, even though it is, but they just will say, please send us files labeled this way, punch and roll. And anytime they say punch and roll, you know that you're not going to just hit record and record the whole thing and then stop. You're going to be stopping. And if you made a mistake, you're going to pre-edit basically. But they do have editors, they do have proofers, because I'm just basically sending them a piece of audio that has one take of everything and not two or three. You know what I'm saying? Does that even make sense?
Yeah, no.
Okay,
I mean, this is what I assumed it would be.
Yeah. So there is editing. There are narrators, and I have done this too, who have edited their own. I have tried to proof my own, and that was a huge mistake. When you were talking earlier about, is there some sort of, thing you need to do to get into this? Oh man, did I ever learn the hard way? Because I allowed stuff to get on Audible that shouldn't have been on there. I'm just going to say it. And thankfully, there are reviewers who are like, you know what, there are like 2 chapter 3s and no chapter 4 in this audiobook. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
Or I would say a line twice. So I learned really fast, because I thought I was pretty competent, right?
Right.
I learned really fast that I need at least another set of ears listening through it with the manuscript to catch any errors. And anyone who tries to proof their own work will find out the hard way. They're going to miss things. I do sometimes edit my own, but if I'm going to do that, because I'm not a great editor, it'll take me a long time. It's actually more cost effective for me to hire that portion of it because I can do what I can do, which is I can narrate and I know what to do, and that's something that comes very naturally to me now. But editing, I have to. I'm not fast and I'm not efficient, and sometimes I'm not as good as an actual editor or engineer. So I'll usually hire someone to do that if I'm producing it. If I'm not producing it, all I do is send it to the publisher and they do all the work behind the scenes. Then all I get back is a packet that says, here are your mistakes, please record them and send it back. And
Yeah.
that's all I do. But I do have some projects that are just mine that I've done either for fun or something I just, wanted to do. Like on TikTok, I do these live readings, and
Mm.
you can only, if you have permission, that's great, but you can't do it if you don't. So if you don't have permission, you need to do something that is a public domain work. And so I've done a lot of public domain on TikTok when I didn't have permission with my regular books that I'm reading. And that's turned into something really fun.
Back up a second. So, like, if I wanted to go and just read, because I see people on TikTok all the time that just, whatever, read chapters from a book and whatever. You can't do that. Could you get
No,
you can get sued for that or something?
you could. You could be. That's copyright infringement. Yeah.
Really? Just reading
Yeah.
something?
Hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
That's
Well,
someone else's intellectual property, and you're putting it out in a public platform. And especially if people can send you money, then like you can't do that
okay.
on YouTube or, and it creates problems for authors too. And let me tell you how. This has actually happened. I know firsthand. An author, especially an independent author, a lot of times if they want to be on Kindle Unlimited, which a lot of them do, they have to sign an agreement that says this work is exclusively sold through Amazon. You have to sign that. That is like a 7-year contract. If a pirate comes along and starts putting that work on YouTube, or they have pirate sites, the author can basically lose their account with Amazon, and then they have no recourse over either the sale of the book. They've been kicked off saying, we found your book on such and such site or on YouTube. So you no longer have an account.
How can you prevent that from happening? But anyone could just go and
That
do
is the
that any
million
minute.
dollar question. There have been, people will report pirate sites, or they'll go to YouTube and report videos of their work. But there are people out there who are just, they're stealing people's intellectual property and making money off of it. So, and it really does hurt these independent authors, because they're the ones that will pay the price, because whoever took and here's another problem is someone will give out ARCs, advanced reader copies, these that before they print it, they want people to read it and review it. Some of those ARCs have been leaked. And that's so the manuscript is out there, and now the author has no way to make any income off of that work if Amazon finds out and deletes their account. They have no way of recovering it because it's now just out there. So it's been a great source of anxiety for authors that are independent, to be honest.
Huh.
I don't know that there is a fix for it. People have said, well, I'm going to boycott KU, but that's not a good idea either, because then you really put them in a bad place. So if you want to support independent authors, either buy their book or and don't share it, because it's that is a big struggle. And Amazon, they're huge. They kind of don't really care.
Yeah, I was going to say there's no competition. I mean, we spoke about this at the beginning. If there does exist competition, it's very small because Amazon's got the monopoly. But
Yeah,
that blows my mind because that's something that you can't help. You can't control if that happens.
exactly.
Madness.
But there are people out there saying, I will never write another book. I mean, we're going to lose those creative people who don't have these large publisher contracts if it gets bad enough, because, being in the industry, you hear it. And I do work with independent authors. So causes a great deal of anxiety for them. And they're like, well, is it even worth it? Because I know of one person who had their account pulled. They have no way of making any money off the work they did, that took a year, which
Wow.
stinks. So, I mean, yeah,
Oh, well, that's incredibly sad.
it
Wow.
is.
Just
Yeah.
to move on for that. Wow. Let's try and make things a bit more cheery. You have recorded, and this was at the time that I did my research. It's probably gone up since then. Let's say over 200 audiobooks at the very minimum over the
Yeah.
course of your career so far. What would you say were the most memorable projects and why?
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to just say, you know, the idea that I get to sit and read books is it's like a dream job for me, even though, yeah, I'm kind of, I have to do all the stuff that I have to do, but it's amazing. Um, I would say the most memorable for me was one of the first books I ever did that was a nonfiction piece that required me to go beyond what I was even comfortable doing. The book was called The Night I Danced with Rommel. I auditioned for it because I wanted to take a risk, and it was probably one of the very first I ever did. It may be the very first, at least novel. Anyway, it was written by a woman living in Liverpool who is German. It's her mother's story of World War II. And the story itself, I mean, I just cried through it. It was amazing, this woman in her circumstances, how she was able to do what she could to save people. And anyway, so it meant a lot. It was also because it was very painful. It took me months to do that book because I didn't know how to do a German accent. And I'm working with this author, and she was so kind, and she's German. So she was like, I'm going to help you do this. So she really did. But she would tell me if I didn't get it right, right? She was like, no, that is not how. So while it's not perfect, and is our work ever perfect? I don't know. But it was a great lesson to me. And I learned, first of all, that I learned to take risks by doing that. So it meant a lot there. I also learned how hard it was. This, like I said, it took me months. There were a lot of long nights and a lot of tears that went into that. But it was of great value to me personally and professionally, and I learned so much from her. I learned a lot about myself. So I would say that book, it's like that one book that we all have. For me, you'll know what I'm talking about. I had that one book that really got me into reading, and it was Walter Farley's The Black Stallion. I've read a ton of books that I have loved. That book is the book that changed everything, right? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, for some people, it's Harry Potter, changed everything. For my kids, it was Harry Potter because they struggled with reading. And somehow getting into the Harry Potter series, it clicked. So we all have that book. That audiobook for me was the one where I probably worked harder than I ever have because I didn't know as much as I needed to do it. And so it was very painful, but also very precious. And I'm grateful I had the chance to do it. So I would say that one is the one that stands out the most to me.
You mentioned in there that you got quite emotional. Like in general, I imagine this must happen quite often. Like when you read certain material, especially nonfiction, you are
Yeah.
likely to get emotional because you're dealing with such intense topics. How do you sort of manage that and work through that?
Um, sometimes I don't very well. There was a day when I just had to take a break because honestly, because of that book was very instrumental in steering my career in the direction it's been. And I would say the bulk of the work I do is historical fiction now. Um, and I would say due in large part because of that book, people were listening to the samples and they were hiring me for, historical fiction.
Oh, wow.
And so I do a lot. I'm doing one right now that's not historical fiction. It's actually a memoir, nonfiction, World War II, about France's first woman helicopter pilot and neurosurgeon.
Cool.
It's amazing. Anyway, so dealing with the emotion, I'll tell you one thing that actually has helped me is being able, when I can, to read live. Why it helps, I do not know, because I have people who will follow me either on TikTok or Discord. And when I can read live, they are like, come on, Nancy, you can do it. You can get through this. And they're all like, doing all the tear emojis. But having someone to share the experience with is really healing for me. Also, just taking breaks, because there are times when, yeah, you do. It's like you feel it, you know? And so it's important to get out, to do to balance things out with like going out for a walk, or going and having something nice with a kid, or just really enjoying, because especially some of the things that I do deal with a lot of very heavy material, and a lot of it is real. Some of it's fictionalized, but a lot of it is actual real people, real stories, memoirs, things like that. But I will say, on the other side of that, I have learned so much about, and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of the good in humanity, and how even though in many ways we come from different perspectives, different backgrounds, different cultures, there are some really unifying, wonderful things that are all there. And sometimes we basically want much of the same things, I would say. We just go about it in different ways, and we have belief systems, or whatever you want to say. But it's actually been it's allowed me to be very optimistic and say, you know what, I may not agree with some of the things that I'm actually reading here, but I can see where they're coming from, and that gives me a little more empathy. I'm a little less quick to judge, I think, if that makes any sense. And I think I just
Absolutely.
went on another tangent.
No,
So
it's all
anyway,
good. It's all good. Thank
yeah,
you. Thank you so much. Um, let's flip it.
okay.
Worst experience ever.
Ooh,
Now, I will say you don't have to name any publications, don't want to get any lawsuits, but is there a particular experience where you were just like, oh, never again?
yes. I've had a few
Oh,
of those.
oh no.
I won't say it was a project that was a disaster, honestly, and due in part to lack of communication.
Right.
Um, I owned it because I didn't know what I didn't know, and
Right.
I mispronounced so many words that I basically had to redo the entire thing.
Okay.
That was not pleasant. I've done that two other times. One when I had an equipment failure that I wasn't aware of, so I had to redo the entire book. But that was
Oh
actually fun.
no.
Yeah, that was actually fun, because
Oh,
that's when was allowed to go live on TikTok. So I just did it again on TikTok, and we have a
wait,
lot of laughs when I can do it
how
live.
many hours did you do on that particular project before you realized?
10. It was
Oh
a 10-hour
no.
book. So let's put that into perspective. A 10-hour book will take me 10 days to do.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Do
10
you do
work days.
do you
Yeah.
do an hour a day, basically? Or
Yes, pretty
okay.
much. And that's all day. That's all day, whether it's researching, or whether it's recording, or whether it's, I mean, taking breaks is even important to the process. So I'll be taking a break, putting my feet up, going for a walk. Those are all part of my day. Like, I was up last night till 10 recording. I mean, that's a long work day. Um, I'm going to be recording again today on the weekend, which I
Oh
try
man.
not to do, but yeah,
Yeah,
anyway.
I'm the same as you, man. Like today, mad. Like even though I had this planned, I was like, oh, there's a little bit of time to do things I enjoy. But I knew like I'd be doing this, and I'll be doing some voice acting projects later, and I'm like, it's so hard because I could tell you're also a workaholic as well. But it's like it's fun. That's the thing. It's actually like when you enjoy what
Yeah.
you do, it doesn't feel like work, but you still have to kind of force yourself to I'll take a break. I'll watch a movie. I'll go walk outside. I'll sit and do nothing. You have to do that. Your body needs it. It's
Yeah.
weird.
Well, let me tell you an interesting thing I discovered. Um, I recently got an Apple Watch. I had enough points on my card. I got an Apple Watch. I was really excited. Well, I noticed there are certain times when I'm recording when it sends an alarm because my heart rate is too high. And actually, that's one of the reasons I got the watch, because I thought I was feeling like, I think I'm having either anxiety or something's going on. But every time I get a series of corrections, or what we call pickups,
Yeah.
I have trouble with my heart rate. It's like induces anxiety. So that really is important, because you have to remind yourself, okay, so I have a real life and I have to be available for the people in that life as well. But yeah, recording an audiobook, here's the thing, I will get 1 hour done a day. I
Right.
hope to. Sometimes more. I've done up to 4. That's crazy. That's just like, you just kill yourself to get 4 hours done. But when you have to, sometimes you have to. So, so to get that 1 hour, it might take me more than that, right? It might take me 2 days to get that hour, especially if it's heavy in either foreign words that I don't know, or research words, or whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to really gauge. Sometimes I probably make minimum wage when I'm stepping away from a project and all the work that's gone into it. And sometimes you don't get compensated for that. Some publishers will compensate you, for your research time, etc., but
Mm.
most don't. So anyway.
Ooh, that's rough as well, because it absolutely should be included in that time. Like whenever I'm charging for voiceover projects now, voice acting, if it's a project where they want to do live sessions, I will incorporate. I what I tend to do is if it's things like pickups, I'll offer a few for free that are reasonable and such. But if it's they want a lot done, I'm like, you're gonna have to charge extra for this because it's gonna take time. I'm gonna have to go through it. And like, but the way I look at it is like you've got like your own process that you go through and the time that you're going to dedicate to doing that and such. And that's how you have to look at it. And also from the client perspective, there's a certain degree of expectation. Like if you don't have um, that process, it can look really bad on you. I mean, it can make you seem like unprofessional. But again, much the same as audio narration. I mean, I'm sure there are rules and stuff online for voice acting and such, but I've kind of learned all this stuff myself, and I'm still learning. It's just a never-ending learning tree. So,
Well, and along with that learning is things change, trends change, reads change. I mean, start back from when radio started, and you have the Mid-Atlantic announcer, who is on the picture, in the theater, and it's just this I've had to recreate that sometimes, but it's really kind of fun in that, keeping up with trends. And I just think our job is it's really important to continue to never get stagnant. I take classes. I think that is so important to just get out there, network, and see what's happening. And there are trends. There are things that you want to stay ahead of. Coaching, etc. And I think you become better with each one of those. Some of the things maybe you set aside for now. And I'll give you an example of that. So like years ago, I got some advice from a really well-known director that I just couldn't understand really how to incorporate the advice. And it wasn't until last year when I did The Girl from Guernica, when I went, I get it. This was like book 203, after 203 books, I'm like, I now understand what he was trying to get me to do and how I can use that. So you just never know when you have those opportunities. Maybe just set it aside for now and then maybe come back to it. But anyway, continuing education, really big.
absolutely. Um, you spoke earlier about having to audition, which I don't know why it surprised me because obviously you have to audition for everything else. For some reason, it just kind of caught me by surprise. Walk us through the audition process for an audio narration.
Okay, so I've had a couple this week. Well, you don't have to audition for everything. Sometimes you'll just get an offer, but sometimes they'll look at, you know, 3 to 10 narrators, and they'll ask you if you want to be considered. And if you do, will you please submit a 2-minute sample or 5-minute sample of the manuscript? So that, and part of that is they're doing that more because authors are realizing they can, in their contract, say, I want to have approval of the narrator. That's not always been the case. Sometimes the publishers will just buy out all the audio rights and everything that goes with it. So they would just hire someone to do it. And they almost didn't matter as much. I'm not saying they don't care. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying now the authors, especially indie authors, are coming to the table saying, I would like to choose the narrator. Or at least I want to have approval of the narrator. So you'll go back, you'll do a 2 to 5 minute audition, and usually you just send them raw audio, which is kind of nice. You don't have to really master it. And sometimes they'll say, even just do it on a phone. We just want to hear performance. And then you submit it however they want you to submit it. And for everyone, it's going to be different. One of the great platforms out there right now is Ahab, AHAB, which is Penguin Random House. You can set up a profile. In a way, it's similar to ACX, but it's all Penguin Random House. It's also other forms of VO. They can get on there and check out your profile. You fill it out, you do the keywords, you do all the things, and look at the auditions that are filtered to your profile. But you can also get approached by someone at Penguin Random House just said, hey, can you audition for this? Do 2 takes, one in your natural, and then do one with a Dutch accent. And so I didn't get that one. Dang it. But I that's typically what you do. And here's the other thing, as someone who, I feel like I really feel confident in my career and in my place. I feel like I know a lot of people and they know me. But I still have to audition, So even people who have been in the industry a long time, they'll still be asked to audition sometimes. And there are reasons for that. We should never be offended, that we have to audition again. But it's just, they'll send you the piece. It's usually 2 to 5 minutes, and it's usually raw audio. And depending on who it is, it can be something as simple as just a phone thing, if they just want performance. And it just depends on who it's for. So, yeah. Or here's the other thing. If you are actively auditioning on ACX, then that's a little different. You just go via ACX. You create a profile. You, again, fill out all the fields, and then it kind of sends to you what you might want to audition for. So you just go, you create an MP3, upload it there, and then you go from there. So
thanks for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
You spoke before as well about avoiding stagnation and stuff like that. So do you ever find your work to become like boring or repetitive? And if so, how do you keep yourself motivated?
That's a really good question. And I have a couple of great answers, I think. One is I have a couple of accountability partners. One I meet with once a month, and we set goals, and sometimes we change them, but we'll get together that once a month and we'll talk about the things that are important to us or where we want to go. Along with that, I am part of a group in my local area where we go to lunch once a month. And that's amazing to have that resource. Before that, it was just social media, which is great too. You can find a lot of support in this industry on, Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, just people to connect with, because they're having colleagues when you are by yourself a lot is really important to gauge where you're going, how you're doing, to ask questions, to get support, to say, hey, which one do you like, A or B? You know what I'm saying? So I feel like the answer is in your community, reaching out, finding someone who's at a similar place where you are, whether you're brand new and just seeking out coaches or whatever, to create a community. And this community in particular, the audiobook community, is very welcoming. They will bring you in a way that I've never really seen before, and I have just absolutely loved. But also, if you've ever read Jenna Fisher's book, I cannot remember it. It's about acting.
Right.
It's anyway, it's really good. She talked about when she first started in the industry, and she's like trying to break into these circles of people, that were kind of established, and she was kind of trying to find her way into those circles. And it was either her advice or someone gave her the advice. They said, create your own. That is so important. And that's why having someone like an accountability partner, so you can say, hey, did you know that the Voice Arts Awards are coming up and the deadline is here? Submit your stuff. Someone to help and be with you as you walk this journey together is so important. So, yeah. And you can bounce things off one another. And I think it keeps you sharp.
In general, what advice could you give to aspiring audio narrators?
Okay. I would say your first place to go is narratorsroadmap.com and or narrator.life, Life, and look at the resources they have. Because first of all, if you've not tried it yet, don't do anything. Don't buy equipment. Don't say you're going to do it and drop your job. There are some really solid pieces of advice before you do any of that to see if you're even a good match. One of my favorites is by one of my amazing coaches, Sean Pratt, on YouTube. And it's called So You Want to Be an Audiobook Narrator. It's
Hey.
probably 10, 11 years old. And but it's still widely referred to because he gives such solid advice to someone who is thinking, I might want to do this. It's basically to see, do you have the temperament to sit, to read, to make mistakes, to go back for hours on end? Or is it just not for you? So you need to find that out first. narratorsroadmap.com, narrator.life, excellent tools for people trying to get their own setup. And Sean Pratt's So You Want to Be an Audiobook Narrator. And the other thing is, if you know, then after you've done that and it's for you, be persistent, find your community. It is out there. Look for people locally, submit your work to AudioFile Magazine, submit to awards, see if you can get into the awards arena. All those things will be really helpful to get you on a solid path. Oh, and of course, make sure your work is solid before you do any of this. So I better say that. Make sure you're putting out a good product. And to do that, you need to start with these other places. The narratorsroadmap.com is one of my favorites. So
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. A couple quick fire questions for you, completely unrelated to today, what we've been talking about. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, the best advice I've ever received. Oh, you put me on the spot.
I love this question.
I come back to what my mother said years ago, and I think it's become more relevant to me as I've gotten older. And she said that the two best words in the world are, oh, well. And as sort of innocuous as that seems, those two words sort of embody an attitude of, you know what, whatever it is, oh, well, and we keep going, right? Oh, well, so that happened. Well, oh, well, or, oh, well, it works both ways, but it's like, and then I think just along with that, don't be afraid to take risks and stay curious.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good combination. So, yeah.
That
was very long.
Well, I got another similar question.
Okay.
What's the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
I'm going to just go back to the one that I said earlier, which is, I think we have much more in common than we realize. We may not express it well. We may be stubborn at times, but I've had the great honor and privilege of looking into the heart of people who have written something that means something to them. And I have come away a better person. I feel like life, when you boil it all down, is about relationships. And so I'm learning that I don't know everything. And I've often been quick to make decisions or to judge or to categorize when that was unwarranted. So I hope that I am more open and honest, and because of that, more loving and a better human, maybe because of it. So,
Perfect. Do
okay.
you have any upcoming projects or some final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes. Let's see. Well, you can go to my Audible. You just go to the search bar on Audible, and um, you can put my name in the search bar, and you can see all my upcoming titles that are soon to be released. I think I have
Oh,
four or
cool.
five that haven't even been released yet, and there are a couple still coming that my name is not on there yet. But yeah, always, if you're listening to an audiobook or you're reading a book, it's always nice to leave a review because, especially for indie authors, that's really how they get the word out is by reviews and something they can use. But yeah, I just am glad I get to be on your show today and tell you a little bit
Oh,
about what I do. So
no, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
thanks.
And to all the listeners and viewers, viewers and listeners of the Christian Reeve podcast, I hope you've enjoyed today's show as much as I have. And I shall see you in the next episode. So take care.